Well, here we are again, folks, with the latest episode of the Enneagram movie. And we're continuing with our picks of, I don't know, I guess we're calling it kind of favorite things from 2024 or favorite watching experiences. And last time we talked about a couple of movies or last couple episodes, we talked about movies we liked. And now we talk about TV series. And TJ, we're going to talk about your pick first. So why don't you tell us what that is and why you chose it?
Okay, so my pick is What We Do in the Shadows. And 2024 was the final season of the series. It's a sitcom about 4 vampire roommates who live in Staten Island, along with the familiar of one of them. And this is a show that debuted in 2019, and it was co-created by Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement. It's a spin-off of a mockumentary movie that came out, I think, in 2014, although it doesn't have any characters in common. But it's got the same sensibilities. And I got turned on to it because my girlfriend and I went through a big phase of really digging into the body of work of Taika Waititi. I just love his sense of humor. I love when he's in front of the camera, and I love when he's behind the camera. So this really tickled my funny bone. And it has been an Emmy nominee, but I don't think it's ever won anything. And the more I would watch it, the more I would be astounded that this isn't just one of the most popular comedies ever, because I would just be busting a gut laughing every single time, and it would just fill me with delight. So I'm happy to throw a bit more attention on our podcast to our millions of listeners.
It's nightfall. He awakens. Very cool, Master. Very scary.
Thank you.
Nadja, Laszlo!
Yeah.
Yes?
Can you come downstairs for a second, please?
The problems with living with other vampires are the vampires I have chosen to stay with.
I wanted to talk about general hygiene in the cell. Last night, there were all these people down there, half drunk.
Well, where did they find the alcohol?
No, they were half drunk. They'd been half drunk.
If you've got something to say, then damn well say it.
It's not hygienic!
Nandor is like a big turkey.
Cannot pay with that.
I'm so sorry.
Sir, you can't be throwing ancient coins at me.
Guillermo,
The credit
stab
card's
this
fine.
man. Guillermo is my familia.
I'm not a killer. I find people who are easy to kill.
Are you virgins? I don't see how that's relevant.
I'm killing it, baby.
Oh, that's werewolf piss.
2 werewolves!
Colin, what are you doing in here?
This is my bedroom. My name is Colin Robinson.
Hi, Deb.
And I am a energy vampire. We either bore you with a long conversation.
Hey, Don.
Or
Don.
we enrage you.
Something terrible is coming!
Master, this is pretty macabre.
I've got my cake caught in the door!
Well, yank it out!
I was familiar with it before you brought it to my attention. I had watched a few episodes, and since you decided you wanted to talk about this, I did watch the first season, and I started the second season. I just haven't had the time to finish it yet. It's interesting. I have some conflicted feelings about it. Right? I like it. I admire it. There are times when I literally laugh out loud. Right. And, even if I'm by myself, there have been times when I will laugh out loud, and also watching it with my wife. But there's also something about it that I find a little bit that I struggle with, and I can't put my finger on it. So I'm kind of interested in exploring that as we talk, right? So, and I think I know what it is, but I don't want to jump ahead of us here. So
I've got a guess too. Yeah.
So we're talking about the Enneagram and this movie, TJ. So tie it to the Enneagram for us.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Of the main characters, of the 5 main characters, all of whom I love. Like, these are some of my favorite comedic performances ever. And every single one of the 5 leads that comes on, there's a part of me that just surges up and says, oh, good, it's them.
Yeah.
Of the 5, there's only one that I can take my opinion on their Enneagram type to the bank. The others are like, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And that's the 4 vampires. Like, they seem like caricatures of different types, but not to the point that I would say, okay, if you want to know about this type, watch this performance.
Right.
With the shining exception of the familiar, who is played by Harvey Guillen, and the character is called Guillermo de la Cruz. And that is one of the best 2s I have ever seen in fact or fiction.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Really, really good point. And explain what a familiar is, because honestly, I had not, is that a vampire word of art, or is that something specific to the show? Because to my recollection, they don't really explain the term that I recall. Tell me about that term.
I'm not incredibly steeped in vampire lore. I never got into the Anne Rice vampire novels. I was just never huge into just vampire culture in general. Like, it's just not my thing. I don't hate it, but for some people, they just love vampires. They dress up like them for Halloween, something got a vampire in it. They want to watch it, that kind of thing. Not me. So I'm more familiar with the term as like the equivalent of a witch's cat. I've heard of witches' familiars, which is usually an animal.
Okay.
So I just assumed that it's kind of the equivalent to that. So within the context of the show, a familiar is a human servant to a vampire who's been given the promise that after a certain amount of time, the vampire will then turn them into a vampire as well, and they will be equals. And the premise with this character is that he's been the familiar for 10 years of one of the vampires in the house, Nandor, and he's yet to be made into a vampire. And he's kind of frustrated by this, but being a 2, he's really sweet and helpful and waiting his turn, and seems to have a big old crush on Nandor, but it's unrequited. He doesn't voice it, but he just kind of sits there burning with hope and love that maybe I will get the direct blessing of my master's love. And he refers to him as master. He never says his actual name.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with you. It's a great 2 character. It's all about service to the other, but it's that desire almost for merging, right? In a sense, I mean, it is this kind of, I want to be you. I want your recognition. I literally want you to bite my neck and suck my blood out and turn me into a vampire, right? So, which is, kind of 2ish in that sense. Yeah. So for me, well, let me ask you this question. With, what you said about the characters not being clear, do you see an Enneagram type theme throughout the show?
Yes, absolutely.
And what would
and
it be?
I think it, I think it correlates directly with the Enneagram types that I think the 2 creators are. So I'm pretty sure that Taika Waititi is a big 7, and Jermaine Clement, who's best known for his role in Flight of the Conchords, both the TV series and the actual band that the TV series grew from, is a 9. And I see a lot of 7 and 9 in the show, and not exactly in the healthy way. It's almost like it's a look at the pathologies of these types. So part of the premise is that the 4 main vampires have been vampires and roommates for a long time, and that they were given the mission from their master vampire to, when they were brought to the new world, to take it over. And they haven't. They live in a house in Staten Island and just basically spend their lives twiddling their thumbs. So they're pleasure seeking, so this is some 7 stuff. There's pleasure seeking, there's feeding on people, there's sex. There's a lot of self-focus, like who cares about the victims that they suck dry of their blood and kill? And there's a lot of distraction. They go on little escapades. The show has that in common with kind of traditional sitcoms, in that most episodes are self-contained. There's an A story and a B story. Problems come up and then they're solved and things go back to normal, which brings us to type 9, which is there's a lot of settling in and staying put and stagnation. So it's like these are characters who do not change, who are just kind of settled into their dysfunctions and fully embrace it. And then on the high side of both 7 and 9, something I as a viewer get out of it is referencing Seven, joy. It just brings me so much happiness, as I mentioned, to watch this show, and hilarity. I'm laughing out loud every time I watch it. And there's something really refreshing and cathartic about deep gut laughter. Like it acts like medicine. And then also on the more positive side of Type 9, it's harmless. Like this is not a show that is full of social critique. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love lots of shows that have social critique. This is pure escapism. We're in a fantasy world, and even though it's about fantastical characters who kill people, it just feels harmless. Like there's never any sense of tragedy that people are dying.
Right.
And there's also a sense of familiarity. Like I said, like there's the part of me watching it that's like, oh, good, these characters, this character. Yes, yes, yes. Bring it on. More of the same. Thank you. Thank you for bringing me back to this world that I know and love and can spend the next 24 minutes just reveling in.
Yeah. Yeah. So so this is very interesting, and I agree with everything you said. And there's certainly a 7-ish sensibility, and I think you're right with the Taika Waititi. I'm not even going to assume that I'm getting his name right for whatever reason. I just have this mental block, and I just keep thinking the Hawaii guy, so for whatever reason, just has nothing to do with Hawaii, but that's anyway. So there's clearly a 7-ish quality to him and his work, right? And I think we talked about him on the podcast with one of the Thor movies, right? Ragnarok,
Thor Ragnarok.
right? Yeah, which I loved, and that just had that
great movie.
7-ish energy,
which strongly contrasted the previous Thor movies and the Thor comics, which are much more kind of self-important and bombastic.
Yes,
almost Shakespearean, but like it's a comic book.
Yes,
so it's never quite worked for me. And then he came in and made it funny and took advantage of the fact that Chris Hemsworth is hilarious, and he made it fun.
And he brought in Jeff Goldblum, who always is a shining light in my eyes. Just whenever he shows up on the screen, I'm happy. So in general. So here's my take. This series screams 4. Right. And the whole vampire genre to me screams 4-ness. Okay. In the sense of being misunderstood, right? Being this kind of, I agree with you that they're harmless and that they're, that there's, there's the silliness that permeates the show, right? But the characters aren't silly, right? I mean, it's almost like they take this very seriously. They take themselves very seriously. They take their circumstances very seriously. They have this sense of superiority, right? But there's also this darkness, this being misunderstood. We're not human. We're something different. We're something unique. It takes place at night all the time, in the dark. There's this, romantic longing. And I think particular the character who I'd say is and I'm not suggesting all the characters are forced. Okay. So I want to be real clear about that. But I do think that the Nadja character, the female vampire, is a pretty good example of a transmitting 4, right? There's this lustful intensity, right? And this longing, right? There was what's her lover, Gregor, right? Who she has tracked, through all of his incarnations, and idealizes this goofball, parking lot attendant, right? And, and of course, in every one of his lives, he gets beheaded, so there's this tragedy that she's always longing for. So I just see this as this huge sort of 4-ish, their home, right? This vampire-ish home. It's kind of a dark, trapped in time, the way they dress, and I don't even know if they'd be Victorian clothes or what you would call them, but, it's just this standing out, that happens. That again, just it feels really 4-ish to me. And like I said, there's just something about the vampire genre, which I'm generally not a fan of. Right? I mean, I've never made it through Interview with a Vampire. I've never read an Anne Rice book. I'm just not. I love zombies, right? As you know, man, you put these zombies on the screen and I'm watching, right? I don't care. but vampires I just can't get into. And but they always strike me as fourish. So
That's really
reaction
interesting
to that.
Yeah, for me to ponder as a 4.
Yeah.
A number of things. Just about the house, you're right. It's very elaborately decorated. It's beautiful. It's full of kind of arcane and elaborate decorations and lots of books. And it's not just a regular suburban home, even though it's in Staten Island. Like they milk a lot of comedy about the fact that they're in Staten Island.
Yes.
And yet they're in this house that like any 4 would love to live in.
Yes.
And of course, when Guillermo isn't keeping it clean, it falls to pieces because the 4 main characters have no sense of housekeeping whatsoever, and they don't care, and they hardly even notice his existence, and they tend to get his name wrong, that kind of thing. And you're right, they dress very elaborately. They kind of peacock.
Yes.
And one of the behind the scenes things with the costume designer talked about how each of them dresses in the style of when they were at their peak. So they're stuck in the past of like, this is when I was in my glory. And they really don't seem to even notice or care that the world has moved on in terms of fashion.
Yes.
Like they dress in a way that flatters themselves. In Enneagram literature, when people are typing different famous people in genres, you're right. The vampire genre is 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. People often type Anne Rice as a 4. So it's interesting for me to consider that because I did read Interview with a Vampire like in my 30s, and I found it practically unreadable. And I watched the 90s movie of it just last year and laughed the whole way through. I thought it was one of the worst movies I had ever seen. And it's got me thinking of like, when I was in college, that's when I first heard of the novel. And that's around the time the first movie came out. And I kind of resented its popularity. As a 4, I was like, I'm not going to be into that thing that everybody else is into. Fuck that shit.
Right.
So, and then Twilight is sometimes described as 4ish, whereas I watched that last year too and laughed all the way through. I thought it was one of the most ridiculous things I'd ever seen. I also forced myself to read the first book and thought it was one of the worst things I had ever read. So there's a lot of 4ish rejection in me of the popularity of the vampire genre as well. Nadja, I had actually seen more as an 8 than as a 4, but not as a perfect 8, in that as the series evolved, they leaned more and more into her rage, which not that that's beyond what a 4 could do. But I think the actor, Natasha Dimitrieva, took a little while to find her sea legs. But I think there's a lot of validity in what you said. Processing it now, I can see a lot of 4ishness in her and certain things that would weaken the argument for her being an 8.
Yeah, and again, I haven't seen the second season yet, so I haven't really seen the evolution of that character. And look, it's so easy, and we all do this, to fall into stereotypical thinking about different types, right? And you and I know each other pretty well, and your 4ness doesn't jump out to me like a lot of other 4s do. And that's because now I don't doubt that you're a 4 at all, right? I mean, I certainly, experience you as a 4, but it's not like what I notice when I interact with you. All this to say, it means you're a fairly healthy type 4. Okay. So, and it's funny because I always say, whenever somebody says, oh, well, they don't look like something because they're healthy, I always say, yeah, it just means they're mistyped, right? So I'm not suggesting that you're so psychologically healthy that you don't look like a 4. No, you look like a 4, but you don't look like the screaming 4, right?
I'm not a cartoon of a 4.
It makes exactly, right? And, and I like to think I'm not a cartoon of an 8 as well, right? But, who knows? But there are 8 characters that I just despise too, because they are that stereotype, they are that, kind of over the top version of it. Now, I'm not saying that's why you have that reaction. I mean, I have not read those books, but I did endure the first Twilight movie, and it was garbage. It was just a bad movie, right? Independent of what the topic was. It was just a bad movie. And the reason I couldn't make it through, Interview with a Vampire, because I did try to watch it once, and it was just like, this is boring. This is just boring and dull and uninteresting and poorly acted. So I just, didn't get through it. So, I think that sometimes, it can be hard for us to see our own type in somebody else when it's really an unhealthy or cartoonish version of it that we don't necessarily relate to, right? Yeah, yeah, you know, I mean, I have a hard time seeing Donald Trump as an eight. Okay, um, I might be the only person. You know, I mean, you know, there are some people who, well, maybe he's this, maybe he's that, but I just have such a visceral reaction to, I am not that I just
Right.
can't, my mind can't go there. So, anyway, I think that, you know, you don't relate to being that kind of, Elizabethan costume wearing four, right? So, so, so it might not jump out to you, right? Is a CJ, but as I'm watching it, I'm thinking, oh, geez, no wonder TJ picked this. It's just pure four stuff, and
And how many four sitcoms are there? Like that's a short list.
yeah,
Like in all of television history.
but I think it works because it brings this seven-ish sensibility to it, right? To your
Right.
point, it's not pure. And, I don't know if I shared this with you or if we've kicked this around yet, but I think that some characters work better and even some shows will work better when there's a disconnect rightly done between the aspects of personality, right? So, for example, one of the reasons that I think, for example, that transmitting nines are such compelling characters in so many movies, and so many actors are probably transmitting nines because there's a disconnect that feels consistent at the same time, right? So, Clint Eastwood, for example, okay, when you look at him as a transmitting nine, it's like, oh, okay, now I get him. But when you look at him through without the Enneagram, it's this character, it's this, there seems to be this conflict, Josie Wales, for example, right? It's like, all right, he's not John Wayne, he's not this, he's not that, he's something more complicated. Okay. And I think this series is a good example of where that seven-ish sensibility works well with kind of a four-ish theme to create something that's more interesting than had it just been like a madcap seven thing or a, depressive four-ish thing. Okay. So,
because these are actors who are in no way afraid to let themselves be the butt of the joke,
right,
like constantly.
Right.
Like the joke is always on them. In the case of every single one of the five leads,
yes,
they never look heroic.
And I think the only one who seems to know it, or the two that seem to know it, I think Guillermo kind of, knows that I don't know that he knows he's the butt of the joke or, that it's, but he seems to be a bit more self-aware, we'll say. Okay.
Right. He knows he's getting the shitty end of the stick.
Yes. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And because it's a mockumentary, everybody has the ability to, first of all, there's the interviews that are interspersed with the scenes. But then within a scene, anybody can just look at the camera. Like that's yes. Not verboten. And he does it probably more than the vampires do.
Yes. Yes. And so let's talk about Colin Anderson, because I love that premise. Robinson. Yeah. Thank you, Robinson. So Colin Robinson, describe who Colin Robinson is and what makes him different from the other vampires.
So when he introduces himself in the first episode, because like the other characters, he's not in the movie, and there was no equivalent to him in the movie, he describes himself as a spiritual vampire, more commonly known as an energy vampire. Yeah. So he's a day walker. He's not averse to being out in the sun, and he spends his days working white-collar jobs, and we find out later that he's not actually employed at any of these places. He just goes into an office building, finds an empty cubicle, sits there, sets up, and then interacts with the other workers and feeds on their energy either by boring people or angering them. And he can feed off other vampires too, using the same ways. And in many ways, the character, and there's a number of great compilations of clips of different characters, because each one they have their thing, and it's easy to see, like, here's them doing their thing in a bunch of different instances. So throughout the series, it shows that he keeps showing up in different environments that are really beneficial for an energy vampire, like white-collar jobs. Or at another point, he's at a town hall meeting. He loves city council and local politics. Amateur theater, the DMV, online discussions and debates. He often uses jingles and cliches and pop culture catchphrases that are a little out of date. Yeah. At one point, he embodies a cool teacher to teach a class. Like, the world is full of energy vampires. He's the only one who's self-aware about it.
Right. Yeah, there's
he dresses he dresses in a sweater vest,
right,
and a tie, like this kind of buttoned-up guy.
Yes. So that actor who I had not seen before, he actually popped up in a show I was watching that I liked the first few episodes of, but then I started to get I thought it got a little stale. AP Bio, about a philosophy professor who gets fired from Harvard or something and ends up teaching at a high school. And, it's this obnoxious, I won't explain the plot, but it was good. Anyway, he pretty much plays the same character in that movie. It's like he's a guy that, like, the teachers who do something bad get put into this like teacher version of detention, where they have to show up every day and then just sit in this room, and he's in there, and he was put there because he was trying to touch other teachers or something, and it turns out at the end that, like, he didn't actually belong there. He was just there to to kind of hang out, like you're talking about with the job. So it was funny to see him in that role. Now, I love that character, and there was the one episode where he kind of connected with an emotional vampire, right? A woman who would suck the emotion out of people by playing to their pity and, talk about her cat dying and all these other sort of things. So between the two of them, they're fighting over the people in the office, who can drain them first, and, that sort of thing, which was just wonderful. I saw him as kind of five-ish, actually. And I'll explain why. So first of all, there's that flat affect, there's that, kind of, I don't know, sort of five-ish hesitance, again, a stereotypical five, right? There's that nerdy sort of hesitance that you do. If you remember the scene where they were planning the orgy and he's showing his room and it looked like a monk's chambers, right? It was just, there was just a bed and, that sort of thing. And I don't want to offend my five friends, many of whom I know and love and adore and just think are wonderful, wonderful people. But energetically, they can almost feel like I always think of fives as almost like going inward energetically, right? And it can create this sort of feeling of a vacuum in a way, and and I often joke, and again, I apologize to my five friends, but a 7 or an 8 walks into a room and it's like 2 people enter the room sometimes, right? Because of just this expressiveness and this energy. And sometimes a 5 walks into a room and it's like 2 people left, right? Because they, and, and that's kind of how how Colin Robinson feels, right? Just sucking the energy. So anyway, giving into all the awful stereotypes of fives, most of whom are wonderful, dear, sweet people. I saw him as a very negative kind of five-ish character. Reaction to that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, because my best guess for him had been 9, and I'd seen him as a caricature of a 9 in that he's simple, he's unpretentious, right, slow and methodical. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the self-awareness about all of those things doesn't fit. Like a 9 who was that character would probably be really, first of all, they would definitely be guileless.
Yes.
And they would probably be really nice and likable.
Yes.
Whereas a 5, I can picture just being more mercenary about the fact of, like, I'm going to annoy you.
Yes.
I'm going to suck the life out of you.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to enjoy it.
Yes.
And I don't know that there's any way to discover this, but I would guess that there is an outsized number of 5s within the ranks of internet trolls out there.
Oh, yeah.
In that,
yeah.
Like
Yes.
you can't confirm this, but the whole notion of doing that, which is one of the things Colin Robinson does,
Yeah.
is first of all, you've got anonymity, and you've got the joy in pushing people's buttons, probably on a subject that you yourself don't care about, and you've got the time and the intellectual acuity to at least muddy up the waters, if not engage in an in-depth debate. And take joy from doing that. Like, I have pissed you off, therefore I have won.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely right. And so, and so the way I think of that, even going back to my first book, Awareness to Action, we talk about the blind spot of the five, and it's an intellectual hostility, an intellectual arrogance, right? Of this, and there is this, there can be this intellectual hostility of I am going to use my intelligence to needle you sometimes, right? I mean, it's not going to be an overt sort of aidish assault. It's going to be, I'm going to make you pay for this, and I'm going to needle you, and I'm going to, slowly show you how stupid you are, and, all that sort of thing. And we attribute it to the eightish sort of neglect. I'm sorry, the five's sort of neglect of the eight strategy of striving to feel powerful. I don't feel comfortable being overtly assertive and powerful, so I do it not passively aggressively like the nine might do it, but intellectually aggressively. In that way, I know what I'm doing, and I'm needling you, and I'm torturing you, and so forth. And you're right. That's what I see in Colin Robinson. And I always love that they use his full name
just for fun. Yeah. Always.
He's always Colin Robinson. He's not just Colin or or anything. So yeah.
And very much like a five, I imagine in that kind of situation, isn't really part of the game.
Yes.
For one thing, he's in the basement. They're all in the upper floors in terms of their bedrooms.
Right.
When they have a house meeting, he's not invited. Like he's not one of them. He dresses differently. He has different sensibilities. He can bring them.
Yes. Yes.
And just to get back to what you were saying about like battling people online, for a five, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's not because I want to change the world. It's not because I want to convince somebody that their opinion is wrong. Like, good luck doing that on the internet.
Yes.
Any five would be smart enough to know, like, that's a fruitless endeavor.
Yeah.
It's because it's enjoyable.
Yes. Provoking people from a safe, distant, semi-anonymous place is fun. Right? I mean,
it feeds a person, specifically a five person.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So regarding nines, and this just kind of popped into my head, there's in one of the early episodes, Nadja turns a woman that she meets, a virgin that she meets into a vampire, right? And her big thing is not being seen, right? They go to this frat party and nobody sees her. And, she's kind of like, even in the house, there's one point where she falls, she's crawling on the, on the wall, and then she falls, and Laszlo like walks right past her, not even recognizing her, and then later says, "Who is that?" And he says, and that is kind of nine-ish, right? I mean, that's the thing where nines just have this tendency to blend in, and she does that, and it turns out that her superpower is being able to turn invisible. Right. And this speaks nine-ish, because nines feel invisible very often. They feel like I'm not being seen, I'm not being appreciated, I'm not being valued in some way, and they can feel invisible. So I think that's a pretty good nine-ish depiction there.
Yeah, that character was played by Beanie Feldstein, who she's the sister of Jonah Hill. And she also had one of the lead roles in the movie Booksmart, which, if you haven't seen that, it's one of those last weekend of high school movies. Where two top students, and she's one of them, decide, like, we've spent all this time being the best students we can be. Let's have fun for one weekend. We got to make up for all these years of studiousness. And it's an absolutely wonderful comedy. Okay. So yeah, I'm a big fan of hers. And you're right, like, nines can turn invisible. And I can imagine, like, if a four was in that same situation, that would cause them a lot of anguish.
Yeah.
And that would cause them to write a lot of heartfelt poetry or songs about how not seen and not appreciated and not loved and broken and all of that. Whereas a nine, it might cause them pain as well, but their attitude is more just like, okay.
Or they end up getting angry and dragging somebody out of the party and, sucking their blood dry, right? So, which,
Right.
Which I think is what she ends up doing. And so yeah, you're right. There is this kind of, all right, I'm just going to endure this being ignored until I can't take it anymore. And then I'm going to go postal and, freak out and, that sort of thing. So,
exactly. Beneath that, okay, is this suppressed rage that I don't even let myself acknowledge until, like you said, it comes to a boiling point and then kaboom.
Yes. Yeah. The other, semi-decent type depiction I thought was the Baron, who was very much an Aidish character, other than not having genitals. Everything else was Aidish about him. So, but, he shows up and he's this super scary, intimidating guy that they're all terrified of. And then when he finally, engages with them, he goes on this excessive, bacchanalian, jaunt into the world before, and they're trying to figure out how do we kill this guy, but they're afraid to do so. And then he ends up getting killed, kind of accidentally in a way. So I thought that was a Aidish depiction that, that was somewhat identifiable.
And I'm sorry to spoil this, but he comes back. He's such a good character that he's back throughout the series. Like, he's just too good to get rid of. And he's played by Doug Jones, who is almost always unrecognizable because he plays such great physical characters, usually monsters. So he's both the fawn and the white man in Pan's Labyrinth. And he's Abe Sapien in the Hellboy movies. And he was Mac Tonight in the 80s McDonald's commercials. Like, he's an incredible physical performer. He's tall and he's lean and can just embody all of these different things. I just love him to pieces.
Interesting. Okay. I'm not familiar with him. I haven't seen any of those movies, and I only vaguely recall the McDonald's commercials. So, but yeah, so that's interesting.
Pan's Labyrinth gets my highest recommendation.
Okay.
I mean, it's one of the best movies of the 21st century.
Oh, really? Okay. I'll put that on my list. The other thing about him that was interesting to me is how almost amateurish his makeup looked. I mean, when you're looking at that character, I kept thinking, man, it looks like they just put a mask over that guy, right? I mean, it's almost like they didn't want to make it really professional looking. I don't know. Did you notice that, or was it just me kind of nitpicking?
I hadn't noticed that, and it does evolve over the course of the series.
Okay.
Like, when he comes back, he gets a more human appearance.
Oh, interesting. Okay, good.
But an interesting thing to mention about the show is that it seems to have a pretty good special effects budget that they don't go over the top with. So the vampires can all turn into bats, and they can fly, they can climb walls.
Yeah.
It's not unusual for Nadja to scream so loud that something shatters. Like, that kind of thing happens with reasonable frequency, but it's never so common that it just becomes a spectacle of, like, look at what we can do. I think they use it really judiciously.
Yeah, and they do it well. I mean, right, the scenes where they turn into bats are pretty seamless, right?
It's believable, yeah. It's not like, let's laugh at this silly attempt to recreate this. Like, it looks absolutely believable.
Right.
The comedy comes from the fact that Laszlo always just declares bat before he turns into a bat. Or when they fly to confront each other, they're hissing, but it's over something completely insignificant, and nobody ever actually wins.
All right, great. All right, good. So, what we do in the shadows? Anything else you want to comment on about it before we wrap up?
I think Laszlo is a really great example of an archetype of Type 4, which is the natural aristocrat.
Yeah.
So he's just such a dandy, and he speaks with an upper-class English accent, and they really milk some good comedy out of that by having him overpronounce certain words.
Yes.
And it's hard to know how much of that's the scriptwriter or the director or the actor himself embellishing what they've written, but he can take a seemingly ordinary word like New York City and just make a meal out of it, to the point that different things he has said have become catchphrases between my partner and I, and they can just make us laugh simply by repeating it. And there's good supercuts of him overpronouncing certain things. So I think in general, Matt Berry, the actor, plays caricatures of fours. I think that is the foundation of his career. He's in a British TV show called Toast of London, where he plays a has-been actor called Richard Toast, who is trying to get his career back on track. And he's pretentious and not very good and has no self-awareness whatsoever. And you can say all of those things about Laszlo. And those are all very unflattering ways to describe a four. Like they're just cartoons of a four. And as a four, they make me laugh to no end.
I would agree with that, and I would go a little bit further and say it's a caricature of a preserving four. And one of the things that I see in preserving fours is this sort of quest for elegance and refinement, right? And I want elegance in my environment. I want elegance in what I wear. I want elegance in how I present myself to the world. Although it's not as bold as, say, the transmitting four, like Nadja, right? She's a more aggressive. The transmitting fours tend to be more aggressive, whereas the preserving fours are more, restrained, but I'm sure there's a word for it that I'm missing. But again, it's this quest for elegance that I see. I remember I know one preserving four, and some years ago when the word
metrosexual.
There you go, metrosexual. Thank you. And so he said to me, "What is a metrosexual?" Right? And I said, "Well, think of it as a guy who's got a different cologne for every situation." Right. And he says to me, "Well, that's just stupid." He says, "You have colognes for different seasons, not for different situations." And I just thought, oh man, that's. And I can see Laszlo saying that, right?
Absolutely. And as you point out, Nadja frequently flies into rages.
Yes.
Laszlo never loses his temper.
Right. Right.
He's this refined aristocrat.
Yes.
Who seems to want nothing more than to sit in his beautiful home.
Yes.
And kind of relax into his brilliance and sophistication.
Yes. Yes. So that leaves us with Nando, right? Who I find to be Nandor. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Nandor, who I find to be a very conflicted character, right? Because in some ways he's this, legendary warrior who has slain countless enemies. And then there's this sort of, I don't know what I would say, this sort of, I don't know, effete sort of, side to. There's this, this bit of a delicateness that's inconsistent. Makes for great comedy, right? It makes for an interesting and funny character, but it also feels a little bit inconsistent between the two things. So, because there's parts, particularly in the beginning of the series, I was seeing him as kind of eight-ish. Right. But then in time, it was like, yeah, nah, not quite. So I don't know. Any thoughts on that character?
I agree. And my best guess is 3, in that he loves to build up his reputation, but he's actually kind of empty inside and has no self-awareness about that.
Just like it's.
So again, an unflattering
yes.
caricature of a 3.
Right.
And,
that's good.
And hand in hand for me with that is the fact that the actor, Kayvan Novak, came up with the voice that he does. Like, he's definitely not using his real speaking voice for the character. And I have remarked on this frequently when my partner and I watch the show. It's almost as if he's used his vampire powers to mesmerize me, the viewer, in that he can say the most innocuous line and I will fall off the couch laughing.
Yes.
There's just something about the rhythm and the cadence and the pronunciation that he does that just gets me right in the funny bone every single time.
Yeah.
Almost like a flattering version of a 3, of just like he's got this superpower to be super funny in everything he does. Yeah. Supposedly Groucho Marx could walk across the room and make you laugh just by doing that, in the same way that a virtuoso violinist can play a scale and break your heart.
Right.
To me, that's that performance. Kayvan Novak as Nandor the Relentless just tears me apart with laughter.
Yes.
Every moment he's on screen, and I don't know how he does it. And I really hope he has a career that lets me see him again and again and again, and see if, like, can he pull that off with other characters?
Right. Yeah, agreed. Extreme. I think all of these characters are extremely watchable. extremely entertaining. The actors are great. On paper, I love everything about this series. And at times there's still when I don't feel myself saying, "Oh, I can't wait to get to the next episode." Right? Which is interesting. And again, for me, I I I think it's that four-ish theme that I just struggle with, and we've talked about this before where, four-themed movies, I really have to force myself to get through. And, that's a me issue, right? I mean, it's not anything. So I just want to say that even though I am not as hot on this, I recognize everything you're saying about it, and I agree with you. I mean, I think this is high quality television and high quality entertainment. Like I said, it's laugh out loud funny, it's smart, it's interesting, it's wacky, great cameos. I mean, I've been especially when they had the Vampires Council, and I'm looking at that and I'm like, that's what's the woman's name?
Tilda Swinton.
Yeah, Tilda Swinton. They even call her Tilda, right? I'm thinking,
Yeah.
how great is that casting, right? I mean, just how perfect is that? And then you've
Like
got
implying that she's actually a vampire.
Right, exactly right. Yeah, they're not even changing her name, right? And
Yeah.
and then you've got Paul Rubens there, Pee Wee Herman, and
And Evan Rachel Wood and Wesley Snipes.
Yeah, Wesley Snipes, right? Yeah,
It's like, oh yeah, they're all actually vampires. But you're right. The fact that they were able to get them to do cameos.
Yeah.
There's an episode where, and keep in mind, they film it in Toronto. So it's not like they're filming it where most of these people live anyway.
Right. Just pop over from, East or West Hollywood, and join us for 5 minutes. Yeah. Yeah.
There's an episode in which there's a season in which Nadia has opened a bar for vampires. It's a nightclub. And at one point, they have two human guests at the VIP table is Sofia Coppola and Jim Jarmusch playing themselves.
Oh, my God.
And I wonder if, were they just there at the Toronto Film Festival? And it's like, come do a cameo. And they did. And they're brilliant.
And fours. I mean, Sofia Coppola is absolutely a four. And, her movies are fourish. I mean, Lost in Translation is one of the great four movies. And Jim Jarmusch, yeah, you guys got to be a four. I don't know.
Five is my guess.
Could be a five. Yeah, it could be a five. I was just going to say, could be a five. But
strong argument for four.
Yeah.
He's definitely different.
Yeah.
And follows his own life, which you could say about both 4 and 5.
Yeah. I would have to rethink that one, and because I just came to realize I've never seen an interview with him. Right? I mean, I just and his movies are marked by their slowness to me. Right? I mean, every one of his movies, which I love. I mean, Ghost Dog. I mean, I could watch Ghost Dog, 3 times a week and still love it. But boy, oh boy, talk about a movie that tests your patience, right? Kind of like Wim Wenders movies do, and some others. It's like, really, man, is this guy still walking across this overpass? I mean, holy crap! Is somebody going to say something soon, right? So
when I saw Broken Flowers in the theaters, starred Bill Murray, and during the years when, it's still part of these years when Bill Murray was on a real ascendance. He had a real renaissance. Yeah. So they advertised this movie as if this was like, this is going to be a big hit.
Yeah, it's going to be like Stripes or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when the credits rolled, I heard 2 old ladies behind me say, "You have got to be kidding me." And I can imagine Jim Jarmusch overhearing that and that bringing just one of those muted 5 smiles to his face. Like, I've done my job, right?
Yeah, even his zombie movie with Bill Murray was one that was like, oh man, it's like, I like this and I love zombie movies, but man, oh man, somebody, crank up the speed a little bit here, So,
and he's got a vampire movie too, Only Lovers Left Alive.
Yeah, that's one. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, the zombie movie is only. Like The Dead Don't Die.
Okay. Oh, so he's got a vampire movie. Okay, I misunderstood you. So what's it called, his vampire movie?
Only Lovers Left Alive, with Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston.
Perfect.
And again, very different from any other vampire movie you've ever seen. Much slower rhythm, much more subtle execution.
I gotcha. All right, good. All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, TJ. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
If anybody hasn't seen What We Do in the Shadows, I highly recommend it, obviously, from everything I've said.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if you don't like it, I will not hold it against you, but I'll probably feel superior.
And again, I want to be really clear, right? Because I don't want you to feel superior to me. I liked it, and it almost and again, there's it's just, laugh out loud, funny, clever, smart, interesting. It moves along, a lot of madcap humor, but smarter than that. And it felt a bit, soulless and immortal.
Like me.
All right. Hey, so we're going to wrap up here, folks. So thank you for joining us. TJ, we'll see you next time.
See you soon.